I had bled through 2 territories before I stopped running. The ambush came on the Havenmere Coast Road. 6 rogue wolves from the disputed northern reaches, well organized, patient enough to wait for the moment my guard had fallen back to water the horses. I had shifted in the ditch before the third one reached me, taken a blade across the right flank in the half-second between human and wolf, and then I had run south along the cliff tops because south was the only direction without a body blocking it. I ran until the blood made the salt grass slick beneath my paws. I ran until Caerwyn Keep was so far behind me that my own wolves could not scent me through the sea wind. Then I saw a light. One window, yellow steady. A stone cottage just back from the cliff edge, above the tide line, with a fishing net draped over a low stone wall to dry. A thread of smoke from the chimney. The kind of light that means someone is still awake, tending something, bread or fire or a child who will not sleep. I limped toward it because there was nowhere else to go, and because my wolf, who has given me very little useful guidance in 31 years of rule, was pulling me toward it with a certainty I did not have the blood left to argue with. I scratched at the door. She opened it almost immediately, as if she had been standing nearby. She looked down at me, a large gray wolf, matted and bleeding, one flank dark with it, and she said nothing for a long moment. She looked at the wound. She looked at my eyes. Then she said quietly, "All right. Come inside then and step back to let me pass." She did not ask how I had come to be there. She did not reach for a weapon, or a broom, or anything else people reach for when a wolf appears at their door at the edge of midnight. She pushed the door closed behind me, went to the fire, and began heating water. I lay on the flagstone floor and watched her work. Her name, I would learn later, was Senna. She was perhaps 28, perhaps 30, unhurried in the way of people who have learned not to waste motion, with brown hair pulled back from her face and hands that knew what they were doing. She washed the wound with water she'd steeped some dried herb in, yarrow, I thought, from the smell, and she packed it with a cloth pressed flat, and tied it off with a strip torn from something she kept in a wooden chest near the wall. She worked without flinching, without pulling back when I shifted under her hands. At one point I growled, involuntarily from pain, and she said, "I know, the way you speak to a creature that understands you," and kept going. When she was done, she sat back on her heels and looked at me. My wolf looked back at her. "You'll do," she said. "Stay on the floor, there's a spare blanket in the chest." She banked the fire, went to the back room, and left me alone. I have been the Alpha King of Caerwyn for 9 years. In that time I have sat across from rival alphas who wanted my land, council members who wanted my throne, and one very determined ambassador from the Eastern Holdings who wanted both. None of them have dismissed me as efficiently as that woman did. My wolf, against all precedent, was completely content. I did not sleep. I lay on the flagstone floor of a stranger's cottage, listening to the sea come in below the cliff, and feeling the mate bond do what it had never done in 9 years of searching, settle. Not spark, not flare, not announce itself with the drama I had half expected after a lifetime of hearing how the bond arrives. It simply settled, like something heavy and warm set down after a long carry, and my wolf went quiet in the way he goes quiet when he is exactly where he intends to be. I told myself it was blood loss. I have told myself many things over the years that have not been true. Sometime before dawn I shifted. It is not a choice. When the wound is deep enough and the body needs to knit, the shift happens on its own, burning through the injury to reset it, and I came back to human form on her flagstone floor with the wound already closing and the rest of me in considerably worse condition than a wolf has any business being. I was unconscious before I finished the thought. I woke in a narrow bed in a small room at the back of the cottage, covered to the chin with a quilt that smelled of cedar and sea salt. There was a window showing morning, white sky, gray water far below. There was a cup of water on the stool beside the bed, still faintly steaming, with a folded cloth pressed against the ceramic to keep it warm. Someone had dressed the wound on my side with clean linen. Someone had found me a shirt that was 2 sizes too small and put it on me anyway. I heard movement in the front room. She appeared in the doorway a moment later carrying a bowl. She looked at me, awake human, the wolf entirely gone, and she did not look surprised. She looked at my face the way she had looked at the wolf's eyes, carefully, without alarm. "Hungry?" she said. "Yes," I said. She brought the bowl. It was a fish stew, thick, with root vegetables, and she had brought bread as well, the dense dark kind that keeps on a coast where wheat is expensive. She set it on the stool and pushed the cup of water closer and did not linger, which was how I knew she was not the kind of person who lingers. I ate all of it. I ate the bread. I held the cup and felt the steam against my face and could not, for the life of me, remember the last time I had eaten something in a room where no one was watching me to see how a king eats. She appeared again at the door. "Do you want more?" "Please," I said. She brought more. Then she sat in the chair across the room, the small wooden one with the mended leg, which I would later learn was the chair she sat in when she sewed the nets, and she looked at me and said, "I won't ask what happened." "That's generous of you." "It's practical," she said. "You'll either tell me or you won't, and asking won't change which." I looked at her. My wolf was watching her with the same still attention he had fixed on her through the night. "My name is Aldrich," I said, which was true and also the least of what was true. "Senna," she said, "are you going to be well enough to walk by tomorrow?" "Probably today." "Good, you can help me carry the net back from the wall." And that was the end of the introduction. She stood, took the empty bowl, and went back to whatever she had been doing. I did not leave that day. I told myself the wound needed another night. The wound had closed completely by mid-morning, and I knew it. My body heals faster than a human's, faster even than most wolves, and by the time I was standing in her doorway watching her haul the net back from the wall, I was in better condition than I had been when I left the keep 3 days ago. But I picked up the other end of the net and I helped her carry it inside. And when she handed me a needle and a length of cord, and showed me the place where a mesh had torn, I sat down in the mended chair, and I mended it. She worked across from me. She did not make conversation, and she did not fill the silence with noise. The sea sound came up through the window she had cracked open, not a view window, just a slit for air, and the cottage was warm from the fire, and my wolf sat in my chest like a man who has come home after a very long journey and has no intention of being moved again. "You're not from the fishing settlements," she said, not looking up from the net. "No. Farther north, you have the look of the northern wolves." I was quiet for a moment. "I live north of here, yes." She glanced up then, just a brief measuring look. "Pack business gone wrong?" "Something like that." She nodded and looked back at her work. "There's been trouble on the coast road. People say the Alpha King's in a dispute with some northern faction. I don't know the details." She tied off a length of cord with a clean, practiced pull. "Not my business." "No," I said carefully. "The pack politics never reach this far out," she said. "That's one of the reasons I stay." She said it without bitterness, simply as a statement of preference, and I absorbed it and filed it alongside everything else I had been filing since I woke in her spare room. The way she had risen at dawn to check the weather before starting the fire, the corner of her shelf where she kept a small box of dried herbs with the lids labeled in her own handwriting, the fact that when old Marin from 3 cottages down had knocked this morning with a cracked pot, Senna had fixed it without being asked, and sent her back with a portion of the stew as well. She had not announced any of this. She had simply done it, the way people do things that are structural to who they are. My wolf knew before I admitted it. This was the quality he had been tracking. Not beauty, not status, not the careful performance of virtue, this. The quiet generosity that asks nothing back because it genuinely does not think to ask. the kindness that is simply part of how she moves through a day. He had been tracking it for 9 years. He had found it here, on the outer coast, in a stone cottage above the tide line, and he had not the slightest interest in leaving. I stayed 3 days. In those 3 days I learned the shape of her life the way you learn the coast from a boat, gradually, by what it shows you and what it hides. She had been married. Her husband had died 4 years ago, a storm, the kind that takes fishing boats on this coast in late autumn, and she had stayed because the cottage was hers and the sea was hers and she said once with no particular emphasis, better at being alone than most people are. She kept the nets and traded her catch in the settlement market 2 miles south. She kept a kitchen garden in a sheltered corner of the property, heroically small, and she gave more of what it produced to her neighbors than she kept. She asked me once if I had somewhere to be. I said yes, eventually. She said, which I was coming to understand was her way of accepting information without committing to an opinion about it, and she did not ask again. On the second evening, she made a fish and barley soup with the last of something she called coastal thyme, which grew in the rocks below the cliff, and she set the bowl in front of me and sat across the table, and we ate in the particular silence of 2 people who have stopped needing to fill the space between them. I had eaten dinner with kings, with ambassadors, with my own council in the great hall of Caerwyn Keep, where the table is 30 feet long, and the candles burn in iron holders shaped like wolves' heads. I had not eaten a meal like that one. "You're going to leave soon," she said, not quite a question. "I have to," I said. She looked at her bowl. "I know." There was something in those 2 words that I did not want to examine too closely, because examining it would have required honesty I was not ready for. My wolf had no such reluctance. He simply held the knowledge the way he had held everything about her since the first night, steadily, without drama, with the absolute certainty of something that has already decided. On the 3rd morning I found her mending a creel trap on the low wall above the cliff, her back to me, the sea enormous and silver below. I stood in the doorway and I looked at her, and I understood, with the clarity that comes too late, what I had done by not telling her. I had been afraid. That was the truth of it, set down plain. Aldrich of Caerwyn, who had not been afraid of a rival alpha or a disputed border or a rogue pack in 9 years of rule, had been afraid of watching this woman change her behavior toward him the moment she knew what he was. I had been afraid of the shift from simply herself to the careful performance of a woman in the presence of her king. I had wanted 3 days of being simply a man she'd taken in, and I had taken them, and they had been the 3 most clarifying days of my life. And now his guard was going to arrive, because they always did, and she was going to learn the truth from soldiers rather than from me, and I had earned whatever came of that. I went out to the wall and stood beside her. "Senna." She looked up. "My name is Aldrich," I said. "Aldrich of Caerwyn. I am the Alpha King." She looked at me for a long time. I watched her face move through several things: surprise, a rapid recalculation, something I could not quite name that arrived last and settled, and she said, "Oh, I should have told you." "Yes," she said, "you should have." She looked back at the creel in her hands. She worked the wicker with her fingers, finding the break, and she said nothing for long enough that I heard the tide shift below us. "Does it change anything?" I asked. I did not know what I was asking exactly, what I hoped for, what I feared. My wolf knew. He had been waiting for her answer since the first moment she opened the door. She thought about it. She took it seriously, which I had come to expect from her. "It changes what I understand about the situation," she said finally, "not what I did." "What you did." "I took in a wounded animal," she said. "I would have done it regardless." She looked up then, and her eyes were steady. "I didn't feed you because you were the Alpha King. I fed you because you were hurt." My wolf went very still. "I know," I said. "It came out rough, which I had not intended." She held my gaze for a moment longer, then looked back at the creel. "Your people are coming," she said. I can hear horses on the coast road. They arrived 20 minutes later, Captain Rowan first, with 6 of my personal guard, face tight with 3 days of controlled fear held carefully in check. He stopped his horse at the cottage gate and looked at me standing on the cliff wall, and I watched the relief move through him before the professionalism locked back into place. "Your Majesty," he said, "we've been riding the coast since yesterday morning." "I know I'm all right." I looked back at the cottage. Senna had gone inside. "Give me a moment." She was at the table when I came in, her hands around a cup, her back very straight. She did not look up immediately. "I have to go," I said. "I know." "Senna," I waited until she looked at me. "This is not finished." She held my gaze. "You're the Alpha King," she said. "You have a kingdom." "Yes," I said. "And I have a wolf who has not been this certain about anything in 9 years of rule, and I have a mark on my wrist that was not there 4 days ago." I turned my left wrist up, the mate mark, faint as watercolor at its edges but unmistakable, the crescent-tanned wave that Kerwin's bond has carried for generations. "I wanted you to see it before I left, so you would know this is not courtesy." She looked at the mark for a long time. Then she set her cup down and turned her right wrist up, and the same mark was there, faint and new, curling along the inner wrist in the exact same watercolor way. She stared at it. I do not think she had noticed it before. "Oh," she said, more quietly than the first time. "Yes," I said. She looked up. Something in her face had shifted, not alarm, not calculation, simply a woman taking in information that reorganizes everything and deciding, at her own pace, what to do with it. "I don't know anything about being a Luna," she said finally. "I know. I live on the outer coast. I know that too. I have nets to mend." I could not help it. Something in my chest that had been locked for 9 years moved, briefly, toward warmth. "The nets will still need mending," I said. "That doesn't stop because of a title." She looked at me for a long time. Then she looked at the mark on her wrist again and back at me, and she said, "Come back when you've dealt with whatever happened on the coast road." "I will. Not with soldiers." "Without soldiers," I agreed. She picked up her cup. She nodded once, in the way that means the matter is settled, and I went out to where Rowan was waiting, and I did not let myself look back at the window, because if I had looked back at the window I would not have left. The northern faction was dealt with in 11 days. I will not detail the politics of it, the disputed packlands, the rogue wolves from the northern reaches, the 3 nights of negotiation that ended, finally, with a border accord that has held in the 3 years since. I will say only that I moved through those 11 days with a focus I had not had in years, because I knew what was waiting on the other side of them, and my wolf would not let me be anything less than efficient about removing every obstacle between us and the coast. On the 12th day I rode south, alone as I had promised. I left the crown at the keep. I took my horse, a traveling cloak, and the weight of everything I intended to say, and I rode the coast road as the sun dropped into the sea and turned the water orange and the cliffs the color of old bronze. Her light was on when I reached the cottage gate. She opened the door before I knocked. She must have heard the horse, and she stood in the doorway and looked at me for a moment, and she said, "You dealt with it." "It's done," I said. "Come inside," she said. "I have soup." I tied the horse at the wall and I went inside, and she gave me soup, and we sat across the table from each other in the particular quiet that is not silence but is something better than silence. And I ate, and she watched me eat with the same steady attention she had given the wolf at her door, and neither of us rushed. "I have thought about it," she said, when the bowls were empty. "And—" She looked at her wrist, at the mark, which had deepened in the 11 days since I had left, as marks do when the bond is settling in. She looked at mine, which I had turned up on the table without quite meaning to. "I have been alone here for 4 years," she said. "I chose it because I was better at it than most people. That's still true. She looked up. But I am also aware that what happened the week you were here, I was not alone, and I was not worse at it. I was something else entirely. She considered this. I don't have words for what I was. Neither do I said. My wolf does. He's been rather insufferable about it. Her mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it was the direction of one. What does your wolf say? He says he found what he was looking for, I said. He says it took 9 years because what he was looking for doesn't present itself where kings normally look. He says he would like to never be separated from it again, and he has expressed this opinion at significant volume for 11 days. She looked at me, and what do you say? I set my hand on the table, palm up, not reaching simply there. I say I have spent 9 years ruling a kingdom and not understanding what it was for, I said. And I spent 3 days in a stone cottage above the tide line understanding it completely. I looked at her. I say I would like to come back to that understanding. She looked at my hand for a long time, then she placed hers in it. The mate mark on both our wrists blazed, briefly, gold, the bond settling into its final register, the crescent-tanned wave completing itself on both sides, and then it subsided to something steady, warm, permanent. My wolf made a sound that I had never heard him make in 9 years, something between a breath and a bow. I'll need time, she said. As much as you need. I'll need to understand what is actually required of a Luna on the outer coast. I'll tell you everything, and the rest we'll learn. I don't want to be managed, she said. I don't want to be taken care of the way someone takes care of a thing that belongs to them. I know. Do you? I looked at her. You took in a wounded wolf, I said. You didn't do it because of what he was. You did it because he was hurt and it was within your power to help. I turned her hand over in mine, carefully. I have no interest in managing the woman who taught me that those are the only reasons that matter. She was quiet for a long moment. The fire shifted. The sea came in below the cliff, steady as it always was, indifferent to kings and their wolves and the things they discover too late, and then ride very fast to retrieve. All right, she said. I rode back to Caer Wyn Keep the next morning, and began the work of preparation that I will not detail, except to say, it took longer than I wanted and less time than my council thought appropriate for a king announcing his Luna. My council's opinion on the timing was heard, and then set aside with what I hope was diplomatic firmness, and what Rowan later described as barely contained impatience. On the morning of the announcement, I rode back down the coast road with my guard, with my council, with the wolves of Caer Wyn's inner pack ranged along the cliff top. 100 wolves in the pale morning light, their breath misting, the sea enormous behind them. They had come because this is how it is done in Caer Wyn. The Alpha King names his Luna where the bond was forged, and the pack bears witness. Senna was waiting by the gate. She had not dressed for ceremony. She was in her own good wool, the color of sea glass, with her hair back as she always wore it. She looked at the assembled wolves and at me on horseback, and she took a breath, and I could see her take it, and then she let it out slowly and stood straight, and I thought, there she is. There is the woman who opened her door to a bleeding wolf at midnight without flinching. Dismounted, I walked to the gate and I opened it, and I stood in front of her, and I said in the carrying voice that carries across a pack assembly, "This is Senna of Havenmere. The mate Mark has chosen her. My wolf has chosen her. I choose her." I looked at her. She fed me when I came to her door with nothing to offer. She asked no name and she asked no return. This is the worth my wolf tracked for 9 years across this kingdom. I turned to the assembled pack. You will know her as your Luna. The wolves of Caer Wyn went to their knees. Not in the formal, practiced way of a court ceremony. This was the pack response, the genuine one, the one that happens in the body before the mind has a chance to manage it. 100 wolves lowering themselves on the clifftop above the sea, in the pale morning light, because the mate bond is something they feel in their own chests when it settles into final form. Because a settled bond in the alpha is a settled bond in the pack. because 9 years of their king carrying the empty place in his wolf had ended, and they knew it. Senna looked at them, she looked at me. "That's a great number of wolves," she said, quietly enough that only I could hear. "It is," I agreed. "Are they always going to do that?" "Not always. Occasionally." She considered this with the same focused seriousness with which she had considered everything else I had ever put before her. Then she nodded. "All right," she said, which is what she says when a thing is decided. I took her hand. The mate mark on both our wrists caught the morning light, steady and gold, the crescent wave complete at last. That was 3 years ago. She still mends the nets. She told me in the first month that she had no intention of stopping, and I told her I had no intention of asking her to. We keep the cottage above the tide line as it always was, the cedar and sea salt quilt, the window cracked for air, the kitchen garden in the sheltered corner, the shelf with her herb boxes labeled in her own hand. She comes to Caerwyn Keep when the work requires it, and she is, my counsel tells me with some bewilderment, rather effective at the parts of the role that involve listening carefully and then saying the precise thing that needed saying. This surprises them. It does not surprise me. Old Marin still comes with cracked pots. Senna still fixes them. She has added to her regular circuit of quiet assistants several members of the inner pack who discovered in the first year that the new Luna will sit with you at your own kitchen table and drink your tea and help you think through whatever it is that is too large to carry alone. She does not announce this service. It simply happens, the way all of her kindnesses happen, as a structural feature of who she is, extended to whoever needs it. My wolf has not been insufferable since the morning on the cliff. He is simply content, in the deep and undemonstrative way of creatures who have stopped searching and started being. There is a bowl on the shelf in the cottage, the one she used to feed me the first morning. I have seen her take it down and use it and put it back dozens of times, and I doubt she thinks about it, but I think about it. I think about a woman who opened her door at midnight to a bleeding wolf and gave him her best bowl in her spare room and 3 days of being simply herself, without artifice or calculation or any thought for what it might become. I think about how my wolf found her not in a throne room or a ceremony or a council of wolves, but in the only honest place he knew to look, at the door of a woman who feeds what is hurt without asking who it is first. I have been the Alpha King of Caerwyn for 12 years now. I know what the kingdom is for. It is for her. It always was. He just had to find the long way around to tell me.